So firstly, you're all very welcome. My name is Katie O'Neill and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at the College of Engineering and Architecture in UCD, and I'm your host for today. So schedule-wise today, we're delighted to be joined by the Head of School, Professor Eoin O'Neill. We also have two of our graduates with us. We have Katie and Jack, who will both share their experiences of what it's been like to be a student in the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy and their careers thus far. Then we'll have a Q&A session and we'll answer all your questions in so far as possible. So without further delay, I'd like to hand you over to the Head of School, Professor Eoin O'Neill.
Thanks, Katie. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the school and the programs in the school. So my name, as Katie mentioned, Eoin O'Neill, and I'm Associate Professor of Environmental Policy and Head of the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy. So the school is comprised of 4 subject areas: architecture, landscape architecture, which I'm not talking about today, and then environmental policy and regional urban planning, the 2 programs for which I'm going to talk about the graduate programs we have on offer. In terms of the school as a whole, there's about 100 staff, 600 students, and we're ranked in the top 150 in terms of architecture and the built environment in the global rankings. So I'm going to be talking about these 3 programs for which we have about 60 students, although I think we might have a little bit more next year based on the incoming numbers. And I should say in the MRUP, normally we have 15 to 20, environmental policy, the same number, urban design, slightly less at the moment, although with COVID-19 coming to an end, I think that will increase back to where it was, which is about 20 students. So that's where we get those numbers. In terms of the school, the staff, and I'll talk about the programs a little bit more in a minute. So the staff are very research active that teach on both the planning and environmental policy programs. They're publishing in leading journals, award-winning research, editing journals, examiners at other universities. They hold leading prestigious grants, providing advice to leading bodies, experts to government committees and government appointments to state boards and expert advisory bodies. And our research is cited in leading reports, whether that's European, national and local government. So we're informing policy. So our research has a real impact from across the breadth of the school in terms of planning, environmental, public and policy research. This is just a picture of some of the research projects that people are involved in within the school. So in terms of smart monitoring, bioeconomy, urban health, eco-health, nature-based solutions, flood risk to well water, so that's rural. So there's a variety of research topics that people are very engaged in across the school. So a little bit more about where students would be located. So planning and environmental policy master students and staff are all located in Richview in the planning and environmental policy building. It has dedicated studio facilities, small group teaching spaces, lecture rooms, computer facilities. You'll hear a lot about studio facilities. So studios are where the group projects take place. And we have quite a lot of dedicated studio space. So that's different to what you might see in terms of large lecture theatres, which are more common in the main Belfield campus. We have much more bespoke facilities that suit our programs. We have the Richview Library, which is a dedicated library exclusive to the subjects in the school in Richview. A local coffee service in the Earl's Cafe, and then Richview Research Hub, which provides a research space mostly for our research PhD students and postdoctoral researchers working on research projects. Some of those I mentioned earlier. Now, in terms of the programs we have on offer that I wanted to talk a little bit about, so we have the MSc Urban Design and Planning. This is a master's program focused on the role of urban design in the context of urban planning. So in terms of the key module topics that you'll be covering: urban design, conservation, nature-based solution. So if you think of the major challenges at the moment, like climate change, how do we respond to COVID-19? So nature-based solutions and urban design are central to providing some of the solutions towards the resolution of those in the long run, in terms of the built environment response. This program appeals to graduates from closely related disciplinary backgrounds. So whether that's architecture, geography, engineering, and many more, we're very open to the types of backgrounds from which students can come and earn a specialism in urban design. And the program has its own dedicated urban design studios located in Richview, and they were only refurbished just about a year ago. so we're really looking for more students to join this course. It's usually fairly international. It usually has quite a wide profile of an intake, and we do have space at the moment for that particular program. So that's the Urban Design and Planning program. For students who have come straight through from the undergraduate CPEP program in UCD, that also has an accreditation, a full accreditation. For those who don't, it has a partial accreditation. But you can learn more about the accreditation offerings before you apply. So I mentioned some of these major challenges: climate change, biodiversity loss, also urbanization and housing. So that's obviously, in Ireland, housing is an issue, but beyond Ireland, internationally, housing and urbanization, similar to biodiversity loss and climate change, are major problems. And then COVID-19 is the major challenge at present, and how do we respond? So digitalization is one of the key issues. I'll come back to that in a second when I talk about the MRUP. So just as I mentioned, digitalization, we're responding at the moment by working from home, which may change the dynamic of where people work into the future. So you'll nearly be able to work from anywhere if you're in an office type setting. So we now face the challenge of creating places that combine environmental quality with a vibrant economy, quality of life, and distributive justice, in the context of now a changing dynamic in terms of how people anticipate they will work and where they wish to work to get those balance in their life. So we have a 2-year professional planning degree that develops the conceptual knowledge and practical skills required by planners in this complex environment. So there's a combination of theoretical modules and then modules that cover the legal, administrative, and governance frameworks. So theoretical ones about how should we engage with people, what kind of cities do we aspire to create, and then the other ones about these are the processes that we have to go through. Practical studio-based learning and independent research is part of this program. So there's a large studio component where people do project-based classes within the studio setting, and there's an image there on the right of a few people engaged in a group project. And it is an intensive learning experience, which is policy relevant and practice related. So all these programs, they're a step up from the undergraduate. They are more intensive. They do require you to dedicate more time, and there's a very strong jobs market at the end of it, so it is worth the effort. Then the Msc Environmental Policy, this is the last program I'm going to talk about. This equips students with essential knowledge about environmental sustainability and policy and governance frameworks for environmental action. It also develops key professional skills to enable graduates to apply policy-oriented skills. So what the program is about is developing your skill set with basic foundation knowledge and then solutions focused to public policy. So core modules, environmental economics, environment behavior, EU environmental policy. So there's a sort of ground foundation modules. And then the modules in the second trimester are all focused on applications and solutions. And then there's a summer internship, which is also proving very popular. In terms of the jobs market across all 3 programs, very strong opportunities at present. Public and private sector of planning, there's a very strong call for graduates at present. I spoke to the head of planning this morning, and she's getting emails every day seeking candidates for jobs that they can't fill at the moment. And then the climate and sustainability area, for people who have policy relevant training, is also a very strong call for people. So if you looked at LinkedIn at the moment, you'd see there's a lot of new era jobs in terms of directors of sustainability, directors of climate change in high-end companies that didn't exist 10 years ago. So there's a pathway to a professional career emergent in environmental policy as well. And all our graduates are getting opportunities, which different to 10 years ago. Now most students have a choice. So in terms of where our graduates are working, we have a variety of graduates globally. So in terms of international organizations, national government, municipal or regional government, so city kind of level, private sector, NGOs, and then also research and academia. Quite a number, a minority, but quite a number decide to pursue PhDs and go into the academic setting as well. So in terms of planning, there's a clear public sector offering and private sector. Environmental policy, it tends to be more diverse in terms of the locations where people go on to work, depending on their background. And I'll hand you back to Katie, and I'll be happy to answer some questions at the end.
Thanks very much, Owen. That was really interesting and a really good overview of the variety of masters that are offered within your school. Next, I'd like to invite Katie Scarlett Waters. She's a 2019 graduate of the Masters in Regional and Urban Planning to share her experience with us. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks very much, Katie, and thank you very much, Owen and Katie and Laura, for having me today to speak. God, it seems like such a long time that I finished, but in reality, it's actually only 2 years now. But 2 very exciting years. I've been out in the professional world of planning, and I've been back to UCD a couple of times to chat through my experience, because I think it's really, really valuable to have someone who's been through the process. So I'm just going to kind of chat through my personal experience under 3 headings. So kind of my pathway into the Masters, my experience in UCD, and then basically my career to date. So I suppose I had a little bit of an unconventional route into the Masters, in that I didn't do the planning undergrad. And I came from an arts background, which is actually also very common. I did history and sociology in UCD originally. And I wasn't really sure if that's the route I wanted to continue, if I wanted a career in either of those subjects. So I ended up going to a career guidance counselor and did some kind of personality psychometric testing, and realized that, you know, planning and the planning industry was something that really stacked up well for me in terms of what I was interested in and the type of person I was. And I hadn't really, I had done a little bit of research into it, but I hadn't really thought about it that deeply. So after that, then I looked, you know, I contacted UCD and got some information on the Masters, and immediately felt like, you know, this is something I could be really interested in. And signed up, and I got in, and I found it really, really helpful. I found everybody, all the lecturers and everything, really helpful at the start, and giving me information and kind of giving me some comfort, I suppose, in being able to say, you know, this is something that matches up with the skills that I've already got from my undergraduate degree. And yeah, so that was great. And then I went into the Masters then in 2017, and was quite it was quite a positive experience for me, having such smaller class sizes. And now my year was particularly small. I understand now there is between 50 and 20, but I think there was about 8 in the year I did it. And even at that, like 20 in a class was a huge bit difference for me, coming from a background in arts and being in lectures, you know, sometimes with 500 people. So those kind of intimate class sizes were really, really great for me. Great to make friends, but also great to get that one-on-one time with your tutors and your lecturers, and you kind of did build up a relationship with your lecturers, having them kind of every week and being able to chat through any like challenges you were having with the course. So that was really great. And there was a really, really great range of modules. And what I found is that when I went into the Masters, I initially kind of thought that my interests were really in the environmental side of things, and they still are, but I found that I was actually quite interested in residential development and the kind of housing sector. And I ended up then subsequently doing my thesis on the strategic housing process that was implemented in 2017. So it was really, really new at the time, and it was really an exciting topic. And while I still love working on kind of environmentally focused projects, it was interesting that those kind of modules, I suppose, brought me towards a different sector of planning that I wasn't really aware that I'd be so interested in. So I thought that was great. And I suppose post graduating, I had done an internship. Sorry, just to jump back a little bit, I had done an internship in between the first and the second year, but I understand that that's actually now part of the course. You can choose to do your thesis, or you can choose to do your internship, which is really, really great. Like, I found the internship an invaluable experience, and it really kind of gave me the confidence to put into practice what I'd been learning in UCD, and to come back in the second year and kind of be able to put some of those concepts into play. And I found it really useful. And then I ended up getting my job then through my internship, and I worked for a company called Brock McClure for 3 years, which was really, really great. It was a smaller team, and I was really lucky and was given some like great responsibility early on, and kind of hit the ground running. And since then, I've actually moved to a different company. I'm now working for KPMG Future Analytics, which has been really excellent so far. So I'm not long here, but it's been really great so far. And I suppose what I've really enjoyed since leaving college is, the resources that I have in UCD, but also in my peers in UCD. I think like one of the most important resources I have are the friends I've made there. Like we constantly are running queries by each other. I have friends that are both in the public and the private sector since we've graduated, and we often kind of tic-tac through ideas and issues that we come across, in our professional life, which is really great. And I wouldn't have that, I suppose, if I didn't have them as classmates, over the last couple of years. And then since then as well, like as a planner, you work on multidisciplinary teams, which I find really great. Like you're kind of a jack of all trades nearly as a planner, both in the public and the private sector. So that for me has been a real positive. Like every day is different and every project is different. But yeah, so that's probably like quite quickly have gone through my whole experience as a planner so far. But yeah, if there are any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer.
Katie, I have to say that was extremely interesting, the journey you've been on so far, particularly coming from the arts background and then taking such a considered approach to what your next step should be. And you kind of pivoted in a way your career direction with quite a focus. So fantastic. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions. We're also very lucky today to be joined by Jack Henry. So Jack did the one-year master's with us in the MSc in Environmental Policy, graduating recently enough in 2020 as well. So over to you, Jack.
Thanks, Katie, Laura and Owen for inviting me for the opportunity to speak today. So I'm one of the recent graduates working currently for Unpost as a sustainable transport executive. So I entered the MSc Environmental Policy with an environmental science background, and I was curious to sort of be able to make the transition, to be able to make my science skills relevant in the workplace, because I knew I wasn't going to be a scientist, but I certainly knew that I wanted to sort of solve problems in companies and sort of and make an impact in that way. So I knew that the environmental economics training that was provided was integral to be able to do that, to be able to understand that we're in a hugely pivotal time, especially it's been accelerated during COVID, where we have this green transition going on, and everyone needs people to be able to solve problems, to be able to solve problems in an environmentally sustainable way, and to be able to solve problems that are in line with sort of EU environmental regulation and policy. So one of the big things sort of that was key to sort of learning in the course was the idea that we were able to sort of conduct policy relevant research. In the second semester, we conducted a forestry project. The forestry project was a national survey, and it was hugely relevant to policymakers. We were able to form a large document, and the idea was that it was collated over a series of months, and there was around 20 people in the team that was conducting this. This was such a large project that it had a huge amount of learning involved. It was really exciting. We were able to conduct multiple interviews, and we were able to conduct this giant survey of over 1,000 people that were involved. So it was nationally representative. We were able to conduct a large amount of statistical analysis on this as well, and it was hugely rewarding and fulfilling to be able to have the opportunity to do that. So in terms of the course itself as well, we had the opportunity to sort of analyse and critically evaluate policy from multiple perspectives, and that was really important, looking at sort of gaining knowledge of key stakeholders and sort of who are the key stakeholders involved in Irish policy and policy making, and being able to understand that, like, different government departments and who are the key players, like, people like Chagas or ESB or the Sustainable Energy Authority, and what do they need to be able to actually sort of facilitate and bridge the gap in between government and the actual private sector, essentially. So currently, what I've been doing is I've been helping sort of bridge this gap with Unpost. I was fortunate enough to be offered a role, a graduate role with Unpost whilst I was on the master's programme. And I had my job offer actually secured midway through the MSc in February of 2020. And then I started, I've been working on Unpost for 8 months now. I started when I finished the MSc and just in September. So it's been a really exciting experience, and I've learned a huge amount from it. being able to sort of liaise with different groups of people, being able to manage projects, being able to solve problems in an interdisciplinary way and look at different perspectives has been integral. And these are all key skills I've learned from the UCD Environmental Policy Programme. Thank you.
Couple of questions here coming in. This one possibly for yourself, Eoin. Do I need to have foundational knowledge in economics prior to undertaking the MSc in Environmental Policy Programme at UCD?
No.
No.
It's geared at people who come from a variety of backgrounds. So people on the MSc Environmental Policy Programme, they can come from arts and humanities, from science, from technology, from media. So their training is very diverse. That really what adds to the experience in the program. So you don't need an explicit training in economics, and it's tailored to someone who hasn't gotten economics exposure before. So it's taught at that level. Although you're pushed hard, but it is taught at that level.
And I think as well, maybe Katie might want to add to that, because the person asking the question has an arts background as well. So maybe what was your experience of going into that school in terms of transitioning from, say, an arts background into the regional and urban planning?
Yeah, I suppose from my own personal experience, having no previous experience in planning going into the masters, I will say that you do have to work hard. Like, you have to work hard to kind of like the resources are there for you, and the lectures, like there is a lot of introductory lectures that kind of do set out the foundations of planning and direct you to where you need to go. But you do also need to put in the work yourself and, you know, do your readings and do your own research. I mean, I wouldn't say that you're at a disadvantage by any means. I feel like I did quite well, and I didn't feel like, you know, I was at any kind of disadvantage because I hadn't done the undergrad. Once you kind of put in the work yourself, like the resources are there and you're directed to where you need to go. So I think it's totally feasible to be able to do it coming from, I'd say, nearly any background, really. Yeah.
So just on that point, both Katie and Jack, from your experience, in terms of your classmates, did you feel they came from a variety of backgrounds, or what was your experience of that?
Yes, absolutely. So there was a variety of backgrounds. Some people had a law background, some people had a psychology background,
Okay.
but many people, you know, the vast majority of people had a very sort of varied background. There wasn't one particular background that people had, which was interesting. It was really exciting to work with.
Absolutely the same for me. Yeah, there was someone from a law background and also arts like myself, and then the typical kind of feeder route then from the planning masters or the planning undergrad. So yeah, definitely a varied group going in, which was great.
Okay. I'd say it was very interesting as well. Oh, and we have quite a long question here, so I'm going to ask it in a couple of parts. Someone asking, is there a summer break between the 2 years in the Masters of Regional and Urban Planning? Or maybe, sorry, even Katie would like to answer this, because I know you used your summer break to great effect.
Yeah, so there's the kind of that typical break during the summer, which we found great because we were able to use that time to get an internship. And for that, I know I understand now from what you were saying, I think it would own that there's constantly emails to the school looking for graduates and students to work, because I know that there's so much work out there at the moment. And you know, at the time things were kind of building back up while I was doing my own internship. So I reached out to on the IPI website, which is the Irish Planning Institute website, and kind of found some connections that way, and was able to get an internship that way. But at that stage we all got them, like there was no shortage of them. And as I said, then it was really great experience, and it gave me the confidence going into the second year to kind of put some of what I'd learned into practice.
Brilliant. And question to Eoin then, is there a professional benefit to gaining the partial accreditation? If not being able to work as a planner, what does that accreditation do?
Well, I suppose ultimately there are training opportunities to progress to the full accreditation. It may not be something you want to do at the moment. There is plenty of opportunity out there, even if because you have a professional training. I suppose the distinction is that you may not want to work in a specific public sector role as a planner where there's a specific requirement, but private sector roles, sometimes they're looking for a specific skill set. It's not necessarily you're on a pathway to chartership. So you can still work as a sort of in hybrid roles in the spaces between some of the professions. There's loads of opportunities out there. Environmental policy, for example, it's not a professionally accredited program for unless you're coming from the undergraduate program. But it's most of the people who do it don't want to pursue a role that requires accreditation, because they're getting roles that are in the sort of policy oriented in sustainability, for example, or in waste, or in other sectors where it's not exactly critical. So there's still merit, and you still get the professional training. It just hasn't got that full requirement, or doesn't give you that full pathway to a chartership. It's not critical for everybody.
Okay. And then someone asking as well, on the MRUP site, they've obviously been reading up on the program. It says you can specialize in environmental or social planning. And they're asking, is that within the modules themselves, as in the types of essays that you choose, or how is it differentiated? They say from the site, it looks as if the only module choice is in the internship versus a keystone project.
I would say that's probably within modules. There isn't a specialism per se in environmental or social planning. Within modules, there's always opportunities to choose how you respond to the assignments in terms of how you pursue some specialism. There is, if you pursue a capstone project or towards the end in the final year, the final semester, obviously you have a choice in terms of what the type of role that you pursue, which gives you more specialization in terms of your skill set, but it's not a specialism of the program, I should say.
Okay. And then maybe a question for Katie or Jack. Now, they don't mention which masters specifically, so it might be a little bit more general. They want to know if the master's is more theoretical or more practical, and how does this balance work? I suppose, how do you bring this to your work, and how did you feel in relation to the labor market when you started?
So in relation to that then, one of the big things was being able to sort of rationalize and justify electric vehicles for me. And the way I did that was by learning sort of some of the frameworks and components on the course, and being able to talk about things like the opportunity cost of carbon, for example, and the opportunity cost of emissions when we talk about long term. And things like that is an example of where I've learned something that was theoretically discussed in class, and I've applied it to the actual sector I'm in. Similarly as well, there's a lot of problem-based learning on sort of a variety of areas on the course, and a variety of sort of different areas, like single-use plastic was another area that was very, very prominent, and forestry policy as well. So it's a balance, to answer your question, I guess, of theoretical components and practical areas as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Jack. I think that there's a good balance between the kind of theoretical and conceptual stuff, and then the practical stuff. Like, we had a lot of group projects, we had a lot of studio-based work, whereby we kind of were interpreting planning policy and development plans and applying that into different projects. And we also had, some professionals come in and provide us with a task, which it would be, say, a report that you'd complete in the private sector, or it was an assessment of a planning proposal, something like what you might do out in the real world, I suppose. And then equally, we had a lot of kind of, going away and looking at more theoretical stuff and forming our own ideas based on that. So I have to say there was definitely a balance, and each came with their challenges, but they were definitely, it was a good balance.
Thanks a million. Someone is asking here, and maybe Owen, you might want to talk to this. When should someone start looking for their internship and they're asking for the regional and urban planning course?
Well, it's a 2-year program, so I suppose you've got a bit of time to sort of get bedded into the program in the first semester. I suppose there's 2 elements to that. You can look for an internship in the summer period between the first and second year. But there's also an opportunity to get a credit-bearing internship in the summer semester of the second year as well. So one is more, I suppose, you're getting an internship with a view to getting exposure and experience, hopefully earning some money. And the second year, it's credit-bearing. So there is not a rush. There's plenty of opportunities to find them, and they're at present. I think there's a lot of scope to get them. Unlike a few years ago, post the financial crisis. So I think it's a pretty positive opportunity to get internships at present. But I think you could work with the staff and the program director to identify the types of opportunities that they're aware of, because they get a lot of correspondence from whether it's the local authorities or from private sector consultancies as well, identifying opportunities as they emerge.
Thanks, Eoin. And could you give example of companies where the Msc Environmental Policy students are doing their internships?
A lot of them are doing them in NGOs at the moment. Some of them have also, I'd have to actually check. I'll be honest. I'm aware of a few. Like a few of them have. There's someone who's in Antashka at the moment. Voice Dublin, which is more a waste NGO. So a lot of them are in the NGOs. Some of them have also had them in departments of government in the past. I'm not sure whether they're in there this summer because they're just starting soon. I'd have to check with the program director. But so they have been in government departments in the NGO sector, and then in some in sort of the what might be regarded as multidisciplinary consultancies as well. So some of the big ones around Dublin are always looking for people who have a sort of varied skill set, especially, for example, in terms of public engagement as well, which is an area where there's a big requirement for people, whether it's from planning or from environmental policy.
Thanks, Eoin. And Katie, a specific question for yourself. Someone picked up on the fact that you mentioned the difference between when you were a student and the MRUP students now, where they have the option of an internship or a thesis. Actually, I should probably ask Eoin this. They're asking, is it possible to do both? So
Sorry.
Is it possible to do the internship and the thesis?
No, you have to choose one, unfortunately. You can't do both. There's just not enough time to do it all. But I think you may come to the point where you have a good idea of what you'll get the most out of once you're in the program. There was a couple of questions about the balance between sort of global policy and sort of Irish policy, more emerging in the chat. I think all our programs have a strong international orientation. So whilst there might be strong reference to the Irish kind of policy framework in a particular project, you'll be strongly exposed to the international policy context throughout the taught material. So we're well aware that there's a strong international interest in our programs. A lot of Irish students want to travel as well for employment. So the focus is on giving people a skill set to use their learning and apply it anywhere. The environmental policy program, for example, it would be more European Union policy would be from where it gets its emphasis. The MRUP program, it has Irish accreditation, but it also has Royal Town Planning Institute accreditation. So there is an international orientation sort of generated by that as well.
Thanks. And a question for you, Laura. Someone says, I'm a resident of Ireland, however, I'm an Indian citizen. Which fee structure would apply to me?
It's a little bit more complicated, I suppose, than just answering a straight question. So I would encourage that person to reach out to us, and I'll put our contact details in the chat so you can get some more information. But essentially UCD does have a kind of a flow chart that you can look at, and you can look at your residency, because it's not just based on citizenship, it is also based on residency as well. So if you've been, I think, 3 years out of the last 5 years, then you may be eligible to apply for the EU fees. But I'd want to know a little bit more about that student, in particular their circumstances, so I'd encourage them to reach out to us, and I'll put our contact details in the chat, and I can send them the link to that various information on the fees website as well.
Thanks, Laura. And someone asking, have the job opportunities changed post-COVID-19 for urban planners? I'm not sure who wants to answer that one.
I think the job market is quite buoyant at the moment. Despite COVID-19, Katie may have a more informed view from the publics or the working sector of the planners, but think it's quite positive at the moment. I suppose you should also say that there is going to be a lot of investment in infrastructure in terms of a response to try and stimulate the economy in Ireland, in Europe. We're aware that there's a lot of money being invested in the US as well. So there's a global response to in terms of investment. So I expect that there will still be quite a significant job opportunities over the next few years. The Irish market in particular, there's strong emphasis on housing development. There has been in offices. So there's lots of scope for jobs. I think there's a shortage of planners in an Irish context right now. Environmental policy, obviously there's a huge emphasis on climate change, on biodiversity loss, even sort of digitalization of the economy, and how do we do that in a carbon reducing way into the future? How do we cope with people working from home? Will there be the same demands for public transport? How should we reorientate our transport systems to cope with this new way of living and working? So there's across our programs, I think there's probably an option there. But if you're interested in those types of issues and debating and discussing responses to those, all the programs we have on offer provide an option for you.
Thanks, Owen. Very interesting. Somebody is wondering, in relation to the internships, are they completely self-led, Owen, or are there any links through the university? So they're asking, do they get the support through the university to secure them?
I'd have to. There is guidance from the school. I'd have to check the latest. There is some internship support in the university. I'm not sure if all our programs are now plugged into that. You will get guidance from the school as to where internship opportunities arise. We get a lot of correspondence from employers or prospective employers who are, especially now, where rather than us having to chase them, it's sort of reversed at this point in time. The environmental policy program, it tends to be student-led, the identification of an internship, in particular because the types of internships that people want are very varied. In planning, it's more singular in terms of like public sector planning or a private sector practice. There's a different type of orientation. In environmental policy, there's such a variety in terms of the places that people would aspire to work that we need this. The students tend to lead on the identification of opportunities. Where there's more clarity probably in planning about where the options are. Even if the students ultimately secure them themselves, there's probably a bit more identification of where the opportunities specifically are.
Thanks, Owen. Also, maybe, sorry, to be back to you again. Someone is asking, they're just not 100% sure about the difference between the three courses. They have read the course descriptions, but they didn't feel it was clear. Now, they do mention the BSc in City Planning and Environmental Policy. I think that may be just a typo. So just to clarify, the BSc in City Planning and Environmental Policy is the undergraduate program. So that's your bachelor's level 8. So really, I suppose if you've got the key differences at the top of your mind between the environmental policy, Masters in Regional and Urban Planning, and the MSc in Urban Design and Planning. Something that they could really catch on to determine which is the right one for them.
So I suppose the MSc Environmental Policy, it's a one-year program. So for starter, the Environmental Policy is 1 year, the MRUP is 2 years, and the MSc Urban Design and Planning is 1 year. Environmental policy it is focused on sort of policy solutions to environmental challenges. So you do the foundation modules in environmental economics, environment and behavior. So like risk, understanding risk, how people respond to risk, types of behavioral responses to exposure to a risk. So whether it's flood risk, for example. And then the other module, principal module, EU environmental policy. So it's a heavy emphasis on sort of environmental policy and a focus on the European Union sort of directives that emerge and how we respond to those. How do we achieve our targets? And what are the kind of policy incentives and policy regimes that we need to create to achieve international targets and obligations? So Jack mentioned EVs. Well, what kind of incentive structures and policy regime do we need to put in place to achieve our a shift from petrol or diesel to hybrid to electric vehicles? So how will people respond if we put in certain financial incentives or environmental taxation, things like that? So it's the environmental policy is probably more globalist in terms of the global environmental challenge, and then looking how are they applied in an Irish context, or you could equally apply the lessons in an Indian context. The MRUP, it's more wide ranging. So like working as a planner, if you're developing plans, you're thinking of housing, you're thinking of transport, you're thinking of community facilities, schools, health issues. So how do you balance the trade-offs to meet the requirements of a new community in developing the facilities, the amenities for developing a new place? And how do you create a sense of place when you develop it as well? So coping with changing demographics of society, growing populations, whether that's in Ireland, whether that's in Africa, like there's the challenges are frequently the same. How do you cope with the wastewater and water infrastructure issues as you're urbanizing simultaneously? So that's sort of the MRUP. If you're thinking about urban design, it's how do you create places that are an enjoyable place to live? How do you design places that cope with climate change in terms of if a traditional city you might regard as more concrete. A newer type of city, you're looking for a greener experience as you walk through a city, and a place that you feel is vibrant and dynamic. So urban design is it's much more focused on that sense of place, rather than the MRUP, which is more all encompassing. So urban design is probably a more specialized element of the MRUP. Like you gain urban design experience in the MRUP, but the urban design and planning one is much more focused on the urban design element. So creating better places to live, to work, with more climate adaptation, kind of from a green infrastructure, nature-based solution orientation in it as well. That's fairly whistle stop, but that's the gist.
No, I think that was very clear, actually. Thank you, Eoin. Laura, just to yourself, someone is just concerned about reaching Dublin in time for the start of their programme. Is there an opportunity if they miss the first week of classes?
Yeah, so as obviously Ireland is coming out, easing our lockdown restrictions, and our vaccine rollout is going very well at the moment. We are fully aware that other countries and other places aren't having as good a time or aren't as lucky. So we will endeavour to work with students who may be having difficulty reaching us for start of term in September. And those students, I'd always encourage them to reach out to either myself or Katie, and we can put them in touch with their programme director to work out the scenario that might work for them. But it'll be on a case-by-case individual basis, but we will look to endeavour to make allowances for students who are having difficulty arriving for September.
Thanks, Laura. There's also an FAQ section on our site, and Laura might just pop up the link there. Eoin, back to you. You didn't get much of a break there. Someone just wondering, is there guidance from UCD in terms of whether they should choose a thesis or an internship? Say if they're a bit conflicted about which they should do, can they talk to someone about that?
Yeah, if you talk to any of the program directors, if you still have queries about how you go about choosing or what happens, that they're probably the best place to provide advice. To be honest, most students make those choices later on in the year. I think the push is toward, well, on the environmental policy program, the push now is towards taking the internship, because it gives you an opportunity to get professional practice experience before you're finished your degree per se. So I think that's the emphasis is increasingly towards the internship, and I think that's the sort of changing, or that's sort of the evolution in terms of education and trying to link to a greater extent the programs with getting into the jobs market.
Okay. We'll just take a couple more questions because we're almost out of time. Again, for yourself, Laura, someone just wondering, has there been a decision on how UCD will teach next year given the current situation?
Yeah, sure. So UCD has not made an official decision on this yet, but we are expecting a decision shortly. Obviously, from an Irish context, the Irish government is hoping to have every adult vaccinated in the country by September. The vaccine rollout is on target to meet this situation, but UCD has not made an official decision yet, but it will make one shortly. We are hopeful, though, for a return to on-campus teaching and in-person teaching for September. But anyone who is an applicant at the moment will be informed about any decisions that will impact them for September as we go along. And I'd always advise people to just make sure they keep checking in on the COVID-19 FAQs on our website, which I've put a link in the chat to as well.
Thanks, Laura. And Katie, to you, what are the class hours every day like in the MRUP? Or if you don't have it every day, roughly, I suppose, on a weekly basis? Someone wondering.
Yeah, the way it was set out or set up, I suppose, when I was there, we typically had one day off on a Friday. And that was useful, I suppose, because in the second year, I continued to work for the company I did my internship for. So I worked on a Friday, which worked well. And I don't know, maybe if you are doing the 2-year masters, perhaps you could still do the internship during the summer and then opt for the thesis in the second year. But you might correct me if I'm wrong, if that's not possible anymore. But I suppose I know there was people wondering whether you could do both, and that seems like a way you could, but sorry, I digress a little bit. But the hours, they were typically you could have 3 to 4 lectures a day. Some of them could have been 2 hours. So I'd say it wasn't a 9 to 5 type of situation. Sometimes you could be in at 9, you might finish a little bit earlier, but it wasn't a full day of back-to-back classes. I'd say typically on average you could have 3 lectures per day. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Just one last question to Eoin. I've completed my undergraduate in the Bachelor of Architectures, and will that give me an advantage in applying for the Masters of Regional and Urban Planning?
Well, it's certainly a very appropriate background to come from. Like it probably would give you an advantage in terms of a skill set in the context of the urban design elements. And obviously it's a comprehensive training in the built environment. So obviously that gives us an advantage. But like we're open to people coming from any background. So like it's a fairly multidisciplinary environment. So apart from bringing a relevant skill set that benefits you, it also benefits the class because you bring a diverse range of exposure to discussions. So it's sort of two-way. So the more diversity in the kind of backgrounds that people bring, it adds more to the discussion about how do you solve challenges in a contemporary environment. And in terms of, I think there was a question, would it be any harm getting back into the professional environment subsequently? I might have missed that bit, but I don't think there'd be any problem getting back into architectural practice having done a master's in regional urban planning. I think it probably would benefit you having a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory and legislative environments in terms of planning issues.
Thanks, Eoin. I know there's a few questions there, but I think we're going to call it a day because we're running over time already. Thank you to everyone who participated and some great questions there. If you want to email myself or Laura with follow-up questions, please do so. And all that's left for me to say is a sincere thanks to the head of school, Professor Eoin O'Neill, our 2 graduates, Katie and Jack, and my colleague, Laura. So thank you all for joining us.
Thanks all. Thanks, Katie and Laura, and to Katie and Jack as well. Really appreciate it.
Bye all.
Thanks all.